All right. Well, welcome everyone to this wonderful real talk. I'm so excited to have Anna Zambrana here. Really, I think an absolutely fantastic voice of caregiving. She has been able to provide, I think, a little bit of her insights when we created the resource that I've shared in the group around leukemia for family caregivers. But I thought it would be a wonderful opportunity to have Anna come on and chat a little bit about your experience um, as a caregiver, and give a little bit of, what some of your challenges were, um, maybe what some of the lessons learned. Oh no, there we go. So if oh no, I'm okay. There we go. I think we're good now.
Okay.
Okay. So if you wanted to talk a little bit about just your experience and what some of your challenges were. So yeah, I'll turn it over to you to kind of introduce yourself to the group and give a little bit of information about your caregiving experience.
Great. Thank you, Nicole. Thank you for having me here. I want to say, I'm happy to be here, but not really, not under these circumstances. I think everyone, doesn't always sign up for these specific roles, caregiver being one of those. But as a mother, I think you kind of bring that role in when you have your children of your own. In my instance, it was my 15-year-old that was diagnosed with a cancer. Specifically, was a T cell lymphoblastic lymphoma, which was also under the leukemia as well, as you mentioned. But it was definitely a struggle trying to take all that in, making sure that we all had the right information available to us and try to seek the help that he needed almost immediately. um, Many of my struggles was just trying to cope with trying to see um, how much I could do and trying to let go, right? I was trying to do too much at the same time. And obviously, that just took a lot on me physically, mentally, emotionally. Teenagers are never easy, but, having one that's sick, stuck in a hospital bed for days, weeks, it just kind of is a lot on them. And obviously, as me being there 24/7, that was also just another I guess burden that I would have wished that I knew how to let go. But that's also part of my personality. I kind of like to take a lot in and have control of things. But as far as my lesson learned was definitely one of those things was learning when to say, okay, I need a break. I need to go ahead and delegate these tasks to some others because thankfully I had a bunch of support. I had, family, friends always asking, what can we do to help? It's just being able to speak that out and saying, can you help me with this? And I wasn't able to do a lot of that. Um, Looking back, I wish I would have, but, I think one of the things that I've always said through this process, is just kind of living the moment, getting through the moment. And in many instances, it was kind of just, making those decisions based of the information that I had at hand at that time.
Yeah, and I can't imagine, I think when we talk to caregivers and they've had a child that they're caring for that's gotten sick, born with a chronic condition or disability, even, you know, the context of caregiving looks a lot different because you're already in the role of caregiver for that individual, because
Hmm.
you're a parent,
Yeah.
um, and now there's this extra level of care and support that needs to be navigated. And I really appreciate you talking about one of the challenges being able to ask for help. Um, because I think no matter what your caregiving situation is, I think it's something that everyone can relate to.
Yeah.
What what was so speaking of asking for help, was there a point where you were like, I have to do this. I
Yes.
have to be able to now bring in some support because I'm getting to that caregiver burnout place.
Yes, absolutely. I think, it's not an easy process, and it was, going through treatment, meaning chemo, and it's obviously there's just different researches and different means of getting that. But for him specifically, we were traveling literally almost every day up north because I we live out in Fredericksburg, so we were traveling to I know of a hospital almost every day. So physically, the strain of not getting the rest and having to drive was a lot. But once we were in the hospital or we were staying there, I was also working full time. I was working from my computer in the hospital. So trying to manage, the nurses coming in and out of the room. Also, when the doctors were doing their rounds, I had to make myself available. And maybe at that time I was in the middle of trying to jump into a meeting. So just kind of made it a little difficult. I think it was maybe that point where I was like, okay, if I plan of juggling both work and being able to take care of my son, I really need to have the help. And I think that's when I eventually say, can you please come in the hospital and maybe stay with him while I take these calls or I take these meetings? Um, that was one thing. And then maybe a year and a half into treatment is also when I kind of learned to let go a little and, allowed maybe others to take him to his um, to get his his treatment, meaning his chemo, or if he had to get products, whether it was blood or platelets, allowing someone else to do that for me because it was just trying to figure out that balance. And I think sometimes, especially when you're being pulled from work and financially I need to still keep my job, that was definitely something that I was just like, okay, I need to step back and figure out how to reorganize myself and reorganize everyone around me so they could help because they all wanted to help. It was just me not allowing them to do so.
Yeah, and that's something too that a lot of caregivers have talked about is, you know, when you are able to ask for help and have other family members or friends that are able to come in and provide some of that support, even if you get to that point where you're like, okay, I can let go of a couple of things, I'm okay with this kind of, being, for lack of a better word, handed off to someone else. But from a logistics standpoint, how did you juggle that? How did
Yeah.
you juggle being able to make sure that everything that, you know, that support team needed
Yeah.
had what they needed?
Yeah. Um, I think, nowadays, technology has definitely helped out a lot. Being able to even be present either on the phone, with my husband FaceTiming me while the doctor is speaking to them, I was able to be not physically be present, but I was there. So now the logistic part of maybe other members not being so close to us, it also did help the fact that maybe we were the ones that were not so close to the hospitals or the clinics. But thankfully, I do have family that is close by the hospital that I was able to even stay with them for a few weeks while he was getting his treatment and I didn't have to travel back home, every day or every couple of days. You know, cancer for children, it's very unfortunate, but there's definitely a lot of resources. I know that there's that Ronald McDonald Home that is available for some families outside of the hospital. So it's just, again, being vocalizing of those needs. I didn't have to use those, thankfully, because like I mentioned, I have family close by. So, logistically, that kind of helped out, just making sure that they were available. And, they were like, yeah, come home and take a shower, come home, get some rest, not in the couch, but in a bed.
Yeah. Um, I I'm so glad that you called out some of those resources too. Um, I know that for my situation, when I was little and in the hospital, my mom stayed at the Ronald McDonald House because we were, I think, close to 2 hours away from that hospital at that time. And so it does become really difficult to kind of like outside of the kind of the family unit and that support.
Yes.
Um, Also figuring out like what else is out there because there's
Yeah.
going to be certain things that, depending on your situation, you may not have that easy access to. Um,
Yes.
so I'm really glad that you brought that up because I think that is something that is a good call out for folks.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, the resources are available. It's just speaking up and then saying I can't do this right now because the financial burden is just it's a lot. Because, if there wasn't a Ronald McDonald Home or you didn't have a family that lived close by, how many families are there that are going to have to pay for a hotel? Not a day or two, but weeks worth of hotel nights. For us, thankfully, we didn't have to pay that, but we did struggle with that financial, deficit in this point because we were, again, if we weren't staying with family, we were traveling, paying tolls, gas. So it's just, it adds up.
Yeah. And that's another great thing to mention because when we talk about the cost of caregiving, I
Hmm.
think that there's those small things that we do day to day, whether it's going and picking up medications, whether it's running to appointments or just picking up, supplies.
Right.
Um,
Cooking at home.
exactly. And that stuff adds up and it does take a lot out of your pocket, especially, you know, you talked about having to juggle work and caregiving and, you know, there's statistics that say there are so many caregivers who have to change their work
Yeah,
because they have to make a switch to being that
absolutely.
really hands-on caregiver. Sometimes that means taking, um, you know, essentially kind of like a different position where you have more flex time, but sometimes it means leaving the workforce
Yeah.
entirely. So,
That's exactly what I ended up doing. You know, I had to switch employers just because my employer at that time wasn't big enough to even have applied for FMLA because we just didn't have the number of employees. So, as much as I tried and be present and try to do, it is a business. They do have a business to run. So thankfully, I had some people reach out, and it was a previous employer that I was with, and they said, "Hey, we'll be happy to have you back, and we could definitely give you the support that you need at this time." So I did have to make the switch. Obviously, I did have to take a bit of a cut in pay, but having that a full relief of knowing that there might not be a chance that I have a job tomorrow was never like in my mind. So I I definitely made that change, and I wouldn't be where I am right now. I'm just so happy that I'm still with them. So because they still
that's
support us. I mean it's caregiving doesn't end, even though Augustine, that's the name of my son, is now in remission for about a year and a half. We still have to, take him to controls and lab work. But chemo took an effect on his body. So we're still following up with neurologist. nutritionist and the coronologist. So there's just a lot of visits that we have to continue to make. And like I said, I don't know for how much longer, and I don't know if this is something, with cancer and childhood cancer, it's, we just don't know if it's a life thing.
Yeah. No, that's, I think, especially with a kid, um, you hear a lot of parents say that, when they're talking about worst case scenarios, getting that diagnosis because there's so many unknowns. It's just navigating, I think, that diagnosis and getting to that point of remission. But then, like you said, there's so many questions after that process of now, what do we do? Where are we at?
Yeah,
What's going to look, what is his health going to look like for the rest of
correct.
his life?
Yes.
Oh. Um, One question I wanted to ask you, because you were caring for your son who was a teenager, um, can you talk a little bit about what the dynamic was with siblings? Um,
Yes. Yeah.
Great.
So I am a mother of three boys. So it just made it a little easier that they were all three boys, just because it was just kind of, straightforward here. Everyone do the same, hand me downs, just kind of went down. But Agustin being the youngest of the three, I do have a middle child who is autistic. um, he always kind of took on that role as a older kind of brother, a little bit more responsible as far as making sure that his brother was not being bullied at school, making sure that he did certain tasks at home or at school when he was always with them because they were so close at age. So he took care of him as a bigger brother would, right? When that wasn't his instance. So prior to Augustine's diagnosis, our attention and focus was always on my middle child who is autistic. So, giving him the support, the help, but everything kind of shifted. And we noticed that, he was kind of by himself now. He had to go through high school and do a lot, take the bus on his own and do a lot of things that he just never did. So, that was that one dynamic that we saw a huge change in, and obviously really took it to heart. But we also saw that with my older son, who at the time was in college. He living on campus, fully active as far as being a student athlete, and also, academically, making sure that he had his scholarship. And then, you know, he decided to take some time off school to help at home. So he took a semester off and was, said, I'm going to stay home to help you guys, which, you know, in any other circumstances, I probably would have said no, but we did need the help just because, my son is almost 6 feet, and 200 and something pounds. He unfortunately had neuropathy that completely affected everything, from his legs. So he wasn't walking. So we couldn't even get him from our house to the car just because we didn't have ramps available. We have stairs coming in and out. So we couldn't even lift them up to get him into our vehicle. So that's when my older son came, so helpful. And he took on a lot of that role. He would go to a lot of the clinic visits with me just to help me again, get him out of the vehicle into a wheelchair and back and forth. So I saw that that dynamic also did change. It's just, that's not what I wanted for him, but it did change. Um, it's just a lot of changes that not only as parents we sacrifice, but the whole family does. And I see it now coming back to what it was before a little bit, but I know it's going to be a while.
I'm I'm really struck by kind of how you laid that out, and I can't imagine as a parent, like you said, you want your kids to be close and build those strong bonds, and knowing that you said, caregiving is really an entire family.
Yeah.
It impacts everyone, and siblings um, are part of that scenario. I
Yeah.
I think that one of the things that I find really interesting too that you spoke on was it seemed like the dynamics changed based on what was needed at
Hmm.
that moment in time. Because, like you were saying, you needed that additional support. It wasn't that you wanted it, but
Yeah.
you really needed that additional support.
Exactly. Yes. I mean, we try different things, okay, let's figure out trying to get a therapist inside the house to get him back. But sometimes just things don't happen overnight. So, that instance, I think I even had to call my brother. I said, "Can you help us get him from the car to the house?" And, it's just things that physically are just completely out of our hands. And that's when one of those instances, just like, I need your help.
Yeah. Well, in situations like that too, that becomes unsafe
Yeah.
oftentimes because if you're trying to support someone that's because I've been in that situation too when I was caring for my grandfather. Like he was over 6 foot, I'm 4'9". And so having to like help him, I
Mhm.
knew at one point once he started having mobility issues,
You
you
just can't
know,
do it anymore.
yeah, it's like we're both gonna take a tumble and that's not gonna be good.
Yeah.
So I I really appreciate you laying out, I think, some of that because it's just things that I think families don't necessarily think about when it comes to day to day care
Hmm.
and, trying to continue on with day to day life outside of that caregiving too.
Correct.
And having that whole family unit be there as that support. So I'm so appreciative of you taking the time to kind of share your story with the group. Um, I guess to kind of end on what is one thing in your experience that you would want to share with another caregiver?
Hmm. Yeah. After just being so actively open about my son's diagnosis, and there has been a lot of local organizations also reached out, and we've gathered with other groups of mothers who also have children that are currently in treatment or off treatment. But I think one of the things that we've always kind of agreed on is, it's just like, don't be hard on yourself. If I had to say something to another caregiver, it's just don't be hard on yourself, and just know that you are making those decisions and those based on the information that you have at hand. You don't know what it's going to happen tomorrow or the next day. Just kind of see what's available to you today. And obviously, your doctors or a group of medical, they're going to give you their professional opinion and advice. So you have to go based on what they're telling you.
Right.
And
Yeah,
don't be hard on yourself if, it might not have been the best one, but that's the information you had at that time.
I love that. I love that because caregiving is evolving. Um, and each day your things change.
Yes.
And to be able to give yourself that grace to say, all right, I went based off of what I knew yesterday, and now it's today. And
Yeah.
here's where we are. And this is what I need. Um, I also really appreciate you giving a shout out to connecting with other caregivers, finding those other folks in groups that are there to, I think, we talk a lot about how caregiving can be isolating because even though there's millions of caregivers, we can feel alone. And
Yeah.
so finding those groups and connecting with others, I think is so key so that you can learn and share together.
Absolutely. They get you. They know exactly where you're coming from, whether it is to laugh about some of the stupidest things you've heard, people say or do, or just to give, like, a warm advice, to move forward, it's very helpful. I personally love attending those type of gatherings and retreats with other mamas and so on, or even families. So I think it is important.
Great. Well, thank you so much for being here. This
Thank
has
you, Nicole.
been amazing. And I can't thank you enough for just what you have done to share your story and really help, I think, support caregivers that may be in a similar position, really see themselves in some of the content that we have. And, we always want to make sure that we're bringing light to all the different kinds of caregiver stories and situations. So thank you so much for being here. I know that my colleague Jody has been putting some resources that we have here at CAN in the comments. So Help for Cancer Caregivers, that leukemia tool that we talked about, and also the help desk. Those are going to be three that we're going to make sure to really put out there for you all, because I think those are great, I guess, kind of starting points if you're kind of navigating a similar experience to Anna. So thank you so much. Thank you, group, for being here, and I'll see you all later.
Right,
Bye.
right.
Thank you.